Hello there, I'm Blackbright and I'm going to do a quick video because it's not on a very interesting topic. It's about the COVID-19 test. And apparently it's not easy. It's not straightforward. They have been saying that, anyone could go in and get a test. You don't have to be worried whether or not you're an illegal immigrant. You know, anyone can get the test. Technically, it's true, but it depends on your credit. Well, not depends on your credit. You have to have a credit check, especially for the home testing. If you want the test to come to your home, it's like applying for a loan. That rhymes. Yeah, if you want to, if you want the test to come to your home, it's like applying for a loan. And that is true in a sense, because what they do a credit check. And they do a credit check because they're trying to avoid fraud. Now, can you imagine if they don't kind of monitor where the test kit goes? A household could order goodness knows how much, and there's no track. And I mean, people could be reordering and ordering. So what they are doing is they've got this company called TransUnion that does a credit check, and it kind of gets information from the electoral commission. Like if you're, as long as you're on the electoral register, you probably would have needed to be at the same address for more than 3 years. Although I think if you've been at the same address for maybe at least 6 months before you apply for the test and you've got a couple of bills in your name, that might work in your favour, especially if you've got a bank account and all that kind of stuff. But basically, they do a credit check just to make sure you are living where you say you're living. Now, that disadvantages people, of course, who may be, like asylum seekers, what do they call those people, travellers, illegal immigrants, and people like that. That doesn't mean they can't get a test, but they have to go somewhere in person to do the test. And I'd imagine that people who are excluded, they call them, they'd be quite apprehensive about going somewhere in person to get the test, which means that these people are probably around somewhere not having the test, building up a little herd immunity in their little community. Another rhyme. Anyway, so let's see what we've got here. The source is the Health Service Journal, credible organisation. Credit database is used to verify identity. Those who refuse or fail are told to apply for the drive-through test, despite government saying there are no other mechanisms. Now, the drive-through test, those places can be remote. It's not, a lot of them aren't easy to get to. You might be lucky if there's one near you, but ordinarily they're not that close. So for a lot of people, it's going to be difficult to go to one of those centres in order to get the test. And of course, you have to go in person, which ain't so great. So a lot of excluded patients will be put off testing. The Department of Health and Social Care says identity verification is needed to avoid fraud. And that's like I said, the tests are expensive. And if they don't know where you live, they're not just going to send them to random addresses. Disadvantaged groups may be excluded from government online coronavirus test and trace system because it requires a credit reference database check to decide whether to deliver a home test. The online application process for a postal test overseen as part of the service uses a credit check company called TransUnion to verify applicants' identity. It's not a credit check. It's really just to check that you live where you say you live. And when they do credit checks, a lot of the credit checks are based on how long you've lived at a certain address. For example, I applied for E-Verify the other day. That's the government verifying check system. I tried for it before, but I couldn't remember when last I took out a loan. And because, you don't really, well, unless it's recent, but I decided when I tried again that I was going to check with the bank to find out when I last took out a loan. It was over 6 years ago, and I don't have any credit cards, so it's very, very difficult for them to kind of, check. And I don't have any credit cards, so it's very, very difficult for them to kind of, check. And I don't have any credit cards, so it's very, very difficult for them to kind of, check. And I don't have any credit cards, so it's very, very difficult for them to kind of, check. And I don't have any credit cards, so it's very, very difficult for them to kind of, check. And I don't have any credit cards, so it's very, very difficult for them to kind of, check. And I don't have any credit cards, so it's very, very difficult for them to kind of, check. And I don't have any credit cards, so it's very, very difficult for them to kind of, check. And I don't have any credit cards, so it's very, very difficult for them to kind of, check. And I don't have any credit cards, so it's very, very difficult for them to kind of, check. And I don't have any credit cards, so it's very, very difficult for them to kind of, check. And I don't have any credit cards, so it's very, very difficult for them to kind of, check. And I don't have any credit cards, so it's very, very difficult for them to kind of, check. And I don't have any credit cards, so it's very, to kind of well, they can verify where I live from because I've been in the address more than 3 years. But because I don't have any credit cards, I um and because don't have a current personal loan, and I don't have a phone on a contract, I had to remember when I took that loan out in order to be e-verified. Because I went back, because I knew what they was expecting, and I had that information up front, this time around, I got e-verified within a couple of minutes. Well, it was so quick. But you need to, and this is a similar thing. I mean, you need to, that's what I mean. When you take out a loan, so when you take out a loan and you've paid it off, you're not going to really think about, oh, when you're taking that loan out or when you took it out, you're not going to remember the year. So when you are going for these e-verification processes, you need to have that information up front. That's just as a side. Okay, so disadvantaged groups may be excluded from government online corona test. Okay, I've already said that. The online application process for a postal test overseen as part of the service uses a credit check company, TransUnion, to verify applicants' identity, he confirmed. Oh, I've already said that as well. However, people who do not pass the checks carried out by the firm or who don't want them to be carried out are being told they need to apply instead for a drive-through test, which is for many quite difficult because of the distance. So the reason why you might not be able to have a home test, that's the reason why I'm telling you this, is because you may not have been in your current home for more than 3 years. You might not be on the electoral register. You might not have a council tax bill if you haven't got utilities in your name, that kind of thing. And if you don't have a mobile contract. Mobile contracts are deemed acceptable for a credit check. So if you have a mobile contract and you have an address that you've been to for at least over a year, if you haven't been in the same address for 3 years, you'd need to have a record of the 3 addresses you've lived at over the past 3 years. So there are about 18 million socially excluded people. So there'll be 18 million that probably can't get the testing sent to their house. And they could slip through the net because they're unable to afford adequate housing. I don't know if that means homeless. Can't afford essential household goods. I don't know if that's electricity and gas. And who have financial insecurity. I don't know if that means... I'm sure if they're on the dole, though, that would be verification. So I don't know what they mean by financial insecurity. And illegal immigrants cannot get the test. Well, you cannot get the test by post. But financial insecurity, that might mean debt. Because if you are in debt, that credit... But then they're saying it's got nothing to do with your credit history. So why would financial insecurity be a problem? Why would that be an issue? Something doesn't sound right. I heard that you could get tested regardless of your immigration status, but now we learn that the COVID-19 testing system is not being given to those who have had their healthcare entitlements removed and cannot access NHS services. They have to apply in person, which could be quite intimidating. The credit reference agency to verify identity means that quite a few will not be eligible to have a home kit, although they can probably go to one of the mobile locations. Groups such as asylum seekers and refugees and travellers and those without a stable address will not show up on the database search, which uses information for electoral registers as well as from financial institutions. So if you're one of these people that goes from house to house or yard to yard, you're not going to be able to get a testing kit sent to your home. The Health Service Journal has heard accounts from people who have lived at the same address for some time and have bank accounts still being refused a postal test when their identities could not be verified. And like I said, that's probably because, yes, they have an address, they've lived at the same address for some time, it might not be long enough. It's usually 3 years. TransUnion checks include the electoral register, but this is only updated once a month, and people may not add their details immediately after they move house. Yeah, I mean, it's not the first thing you're going to do when you move house, is it? Complete the electoral register, although I tend to. Because I know that once you're on the electoral register, yes, some people don't want to be tracked, but when you're on the electoral register, I know how important it is for your credit history. So it's all linked. A 2019 report by the Electoral Commission found between 8 to 3 million were not correctly registered and around 5 million had inaccurate entries. The online application site asked for basic details such as name, mobile number, email address and address, but then request permission to access TransUnion database. Anyone who refuses is told they have to start again and choose the drive-through option. So what happens is that you apply online for the home test. They catch you out by asking for all this information up front. And so people are putting in all their personal details. Then it gets to the point where it says TransUnion has to check you out, and then they decide to come off, but they've already got your details, haven't they? So then they have to start all over again if they don't want to, and then they get redirected. So like I said, if you do want a test kit sent to your home, you need to at least be living, to avoid any problems, you need to have been living at the same address for 3 years or more, registered on the electoral register, pay council tax, have a mobile phone contract, not pay as you go, and have some utilities in your name, and probably a bank statement. You know, they always say those kind of things. It's not sufficient, though, to have a GP or a bank account, as these are not proof of where you're living. The system is not meant to be discriminatory, but it will be, because if they need to report on who gets tested based on where they live, as opposed to checking to see whether or not they have the virus, it will be discriminatory. Because the whole point of testing is to see how many people have the virus, and I would have thought that would have been the priority. But I guess it's a difficult one, because you need to have, they do need to record where these test kits are going. And I think, why can't they just send it to their local GP then? I mean, if they're interested in people being tested, they could have them sent to the GPs, because the GPs did say that they were prepared to do the testing. And that would make it easier. That would take out the discrimination. All these excluded people, they're bound to have a GP. They would be able to go there. So maybe there is more to it than meets the eye, because they could make it easier. It said that the vast majority of users were able to pass the identity verification process and successfully order a kit, but would not give a percentage when asked. When individuals could not prove their identity, there was a range of in-person services available, a spokeswoman said. See, this is where it gets a bit dodgy, because they could make it easier and they could make it more transparent. And if the prime goal is to check on people, for people to make it easier to have the test, they could get it done at a pharmacy. They could send a few to the pharmacy, a few to the GPs. I mean, they would be monitored who they were giving it to. And this in-person services for people who are excluded, it can't make them feel safe, can it? Because they're excluded for a reason. It argued that without this form of identity verification, other countries had experienced widespread fraudulent orders for testing kits. Yeah, I can understand that. I can understand you might not want to send it to people's homes if you don't know where they live. But like I said, there are alternatives, and unbiased alternatives. So testing call centres and other in-person testing mechanisms that do not require identity verification are available to support anyone who has trouble with the identity of the verification process. But like I said, excluded persons may feel vulnerable. A TransUnion spokeswoman said TransUnion is conducting stringent identity checks on behalf of the NHS to help ensure testing kits are sent to the correct recipients and to minimise the risk of fraud. The identity verification uses information from an individual's credit report. And they're talking about stringent. So it's not even just, it doesn't look like it's just about a credit check, does it? If it's stringent, that implies that it's more than just checking your address. Okay, then that's all, peeps. I said I'll keep this short and sweet. I hope it was useful. Bye-bye.